How is it possible that Hamilton, after leading training in Baku with Ferrari, ended up sunk in the classification? What broke in that perfect formula that seemed to have found? Today we unravel all the technical and emotional chaos behind one of the most frustrating days of his recent career. On the weekend of the Azerbaijan 2025 prize, he represented a unique opportunity for Lewis Hamilton and his new stage with Ferrari. After years of frustration in Mercedes and from a season full of doubts, it seemed that there was finally a tangible connection between the British pilot and the red car. On Friday, in the second free training session, the atmosphere in the paddock changed dramatically. Hamilton not only led the timetable, but he did it with authority, registering a 1:41,293 that was not only the best time of the day, but even faster than the pole position of the previous year in that same urban circuit. This was not a coincidence. It was a message. Finally, the seven-time champion seemed to have found the rhythm with the SF25. However, that euphoria did not arise from nothing. Only a few hours before, in the first training session, Hamilton described his experience as a disaster. His statements were sharp. The car was almost inconducible in braking, an absolutely critical appearance in Baku, an urban circuit with extreme speed zones that flow into closed and technical curves. Without trust in the brake system, Hamilton could not attack the limits of the layout. His driving style, based on millimeter precision at braking points, looked completely cancelled. The transformation was almost cinematographic. From the disaster of the FP1 to the absolute domain of the FP2, Hamilton went from fighting with the car flow with it. He declared after the session that the brakes finally worked perfectly, which allowed him to push with confidence, attack the pianos, and navigate the technical sections of the circuit as only he knows how to do it. It was as if, finally, an essential part of the car had unlocked. Everything seemed aligned. Ferrari had heard his pilot, reacted quickly, and found a configuration that allowed to extract the real potential of SF25. Hamilton, meanwhile, felt in control, finally connected with a car that had until then been an enigma. The puzzle pieces began to fit, and everything pointed to the classification of Saturday would be the consecration of that joint effort. But in Formula One, as has happened so many times, sport has its own way of remembering that the perfect balance can also be the most fragile. Telemetry reinforced this perception. The British was faster than his partner Charles Leclerc in the technical sections of the circuit, where aerodynamic load makes the difference. His rhythm in these serpent areas was superior, which generated optimism within the team. Everything pointed out that Ferrari had succeeded with his technical choice and that Hamilton finally had a car that was adjusted to his driving style. It was the ideal combination, a technical configuration adapted to the demands of the circuit and a pilot who began to feel in communion with his machine. But as it happens in Formula One, which seems solid in training can become unstable as soon as a variable changes. And on Saturday many variables changed. The weather conditions were different, the asphalt became more complicated to correctly activate the tires, and most importantly, what had worked perfectly on Friday no longer fit so well on Saturday. In addition, the operating window of the tires became critical. Ferrari failed to correctly synchronize the preparation of the rubbers with the ideal time of track. That lack of synchronization was like a dominoes that knocked down all previous advances. The feeling of control that Hamilton had disappeared. The magic of the FP2 vanished, and with it, Ferrari's illusions of repeating that performance in the classification. The most tragic thing about this technical story is that it was not a bad decision or an obvious error. Everything had been executed with logic, precisely. But in Formula One, sometimes even the right decision becomes mistake when conditions change. The classification of the Azerbaijan 2025 Grand Prix was intended to be the moment of consolidation for Lewis Hamilton and Ferrari. After a promising Friday in which Hamilton had led the timetable and seemed to have finally found harmony with SF25, everything pointed out that Saturday would be the scene of a sports resurrection. It was the time of truth, the moment when words and hopes should be transformed into tangible results. But what happened was the opposite. The performance collapsed unexpectedly, and the fall was as steep as disconcerting. From the beginning of the qualifying session, the environment was no longer the same. The asphalt temperature had dropped slightly, the wind had changed direction, and the moisture in the air began to complicate the reading of the behavior of the tires. These apparently minor details completely altered the delicate balance of the Ferrari. What had worked with surgical precision during the practices began to show fissures. The optimal operating window of the tires was narrower than expected, and Ferrari failed to place Hamilton on the track at the exact moment where the ideal conditions were given to extract the maximum grip from the compounds. This directly affected the preparation of the quick lap. In a circuit like Baku, where long lines allow tires to cool before the most demanding lateral loading areas, correctly heat the rubber before attempt is an art. Ferrari failed in that preparation. The result was a first sector lacking adhesion and a loss of immediate confidence by Hamilton. And in Formula 1, when a pilot cannot trust the grip level from the first meter, the return is lost before starting. But beyond the tires, there was a second equally decisive factor: the aerodynamic load configuration. Ferrari's strategy to opt for more load in the SF25 had paid off Friday in conditions of long and turn batches with little traffic. However, in the classification, where priority is pure speed in a single attempt, that same decision became a structural disadvantage. While teams like McLaren and Red Bull managed to take advantage of the effect of DRS and the low load to maximize its peak speed in the endless lines of Baku, the Hamilton Ferrari suffered to reach the necessary speeds. It was not a motor matter, but of progress resistance. The car simply did not have the efficiency to be competitive in a straight line, which penalized the total return time in a forceful way. The subsequent analysis revealed a significant difference in the maximum speed between Hamilton and other pilots who had opted for more unloaded configurations. Although the British maintained an excellent pace in the technical sections of the second sector, he lost too much ground in the straight sections of the first and third sector. It was an imbalance that neither his talent nor his precision could correct. And in the midst of all that, team management was also questioned. Ferrari did not react with the tactical aggressiveness necessary to modify the plan on the march. There was no reconfiguration of the approach, nor a second optimized chance. Hamilton came out with the car in non-ideal conditions and with a return strategy that did not adapt to the changes in the environment. The result was a disappointing classification, not only in terms of position on the grille, but also for brutal contrast between Friday's expectations and Saturday's reality. What should be a turning point became a warning. The potential is there, but the execution still does not reach the level of precision necessary to transform a promise into a result. The classification in Baku was a cruel reminder that in Formula 1, the margin between glory and frustration is microscopic. The final result of the Azerbaijan 2025 Grand Prix was, without a doubt, a disappointment for Lewis Hamilton and Ferrari. But as often happens in the history of the great champions, the most painful defeats not only leave injuries, they also open doors. In this case, Saturday's fall was not simply a sporty setback. It was a deep learning opportunity. A moment of clarity that served to expose the fragilities of a relationship still in formation between a legendary pilot and a reconstruction team. Because if there is something that characterizes the great teams and the great pilots, it is their ability to transform frustration into useful information and frustration into motivation. For Hamilton, this failure was a blow that came just when it seemed to have found a turning point. Having led a training session for the first time with Ferrari had generated a wave of both internal and media enthusiasm. But that euphoria, as intense as fleeting, was also a mirage. The classification showed, with brutal honesty, that there is still a long way to go. It was not only a technical issue. On the part of Ferrari, the defeat was also revealing. He showed that, although there are obvious advances in technical terms, strategic and operational execution errors still persist that can cancel all that progress in minutes. Falling synchronization and tire management, the lack of tactical reaction during the classification and choice of aerodynamic configuration without sufficient flexibility, are all symptoms of a team that still struggles to become a truly constant force. The fall in Baku should be assumed as a diagnosis, not as a conviction. Because if something has been clear, it is that the car has potential and the pilot too. But both still need a common language. The most worrying thing is not to have failed but not having learned. And therefore whatever comes from now on will be fundamental. Will we see Ferrari act with more strategic flexibility in the next weekends? Will they optimize the SF25 configuration without compromising the speed in line or curve stability? Will Hamilton maintain that level of technical and personal commitment that has begun to show? Those are the questions that matter. And now I ask you, do you think Baku was just an isolated tropiezo, part of the adaptation process between Hamilton and Ferrari, or a deeper sign that this project is still far from consolidating? Are we facing a turning point or before a promise that will be diluted with the passage of the races? I want to read your opinion in the comments. Who really failed in Baku? Was it a strategic error of the team, a bad execution of the pilot, or simply a bad reading of the conditions?